that great prophetic and Gnostic figure, Carl Gustav Jung, had stated at one time that the spiritual tradition has always been in the world, and that it would recur and re-embody itself in the course of history, and that we should look out for that. One of the things he also said that is pertinent to our subject today, he said that the Piscean age has as its symbolic emblem, as we all have seen at one time or the other, the two fish, one colored white or silver and one colored black, and they are swimming in the opposite direction. And that these two fish stand symbolically for the content of the Piscean age. And he said that the first 1,000 years of the Piscean age symbolized the white fish, the light-colored fish, because in it sort of medieval Christianity constellated itself, and the Christian Western culture took form. But then when the second millennium arrived, then things changed a bit. And then what has been concealed, what has been repressed, what has not been dealt with, came forth. And that was the coming of the dark fish. And the coming of the first great sort of spectacular manifestation of the coming of the second millennium was the arising of the Cathars. Now we have to keep in mind, of course, that there has been a great and major manifestation of the Gnosis in the Middle East and in Asia prior to that time, and that was the manifestation of the Gnosis by way of the Holy Prophet Mani, whom we particularly revere here, and whose portrait, painted by his devotee and a very fine painter and a priest of ours, the late Jan Sater, is in the back of the altar. So the Manichaean Gnosis, primarily ensconced in the Middle East and moving all the way down to Asia, was really the principal repository of the Gnostic tradition for a considerable period of time. And that needs to be recalled. I remember one particular sentence in one of the many books of Mr. Manly Palmer Hall, wherein he said, if I can recollect it fairly correctly, he said, had it not been for the wandering Manichaean bishops, that the esoteric tradition would have vanished from the face of the earth. And the ones whom he's referring to are the leading members of the Manichaean Church and then of the Cathar Church as well. So just a few data about that. Mani was the Persian prophet who was born in 216 and died in 277, and who was regarded by his followers and by his own proclamation, the one who came to finish the work of Jesus. He said he was the Paraclete whom Jesus had promised. And as such, he has added a tremendous amount of wisdom and insight and directives for the faithful to the Manichaean communities, which were spread very large, as late as in the 1920s. So Duncan Greenlees writes in his book, The Gospel of the Prophet Mani, there were still Manichaean communities in China. Subsequently, because of all the pressures, the political pressures that they were subject to, many of them became Muslim, and they are the ones who are now in the concentration camps and are called the Uyghurs. So those are former Manichaeans for the most part also. Even as a lot of the victims of the Bosnian War some years ago in the former Yugoslavia, they are the descendants of the Bogomils, the direct ancestors of the Catars who had moved from Constantinople and from Greece up into the Balkans and who lived in there for a very long time. They also, when the Turks came, indicating that one had to take special measures when Turks were coming. So you got to keep that in mind. If you see some Turks coming along, you better go the other way. We had them for 150 years in Hungary. But let's say here the issue was that when the Turkish conquest came, the Bogomils, who were Manichaeans of a late variety, and they started in Bulgaria with a Bulgarian priest who was their prophet by the name of Bogomil, but were most definitely of a very Manichaean orientation. When the Turks came, the Bogomils would not convert to Roman Catholicism or to Eastern Orthodoxy, but if we have to convert to something, we convert to Islam. All they pretty much had to say there that Allah is God and Muhammad is his prophet, and they said, all right, now you are one of our boys. So in any event, they are still there, and there are, I have not seen them. My father has been in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but there are ancient cemeteries which in Bosnia, which have the emblems, the decorations on them that look just like the Qatar cross in the Languedoc. So you can see a symbolic connection even in that regard. So what occurred then was that the Manichaean tradition, so it would seem, had extended itself to Europe and began to make its entrance in the south of France, and then were supported also by the Bogomils who came from Byzantium and from Bulgaria, so that it was actually, I think, one particular Bogomil bishop who presided over the council, which established and reorganized the Qatar church, and which then became really the center of the great heresy, as it was called, which spread out its wings over the south of France and over much of Europe. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that what we were confronted there was really an open coming forth into manifestation of the Gnostic tradition. Why did it occur at that time? Well, probably primarily because what is now the south and southwestern extremity of France was a semi-independent country. The county of Toulouse and a number of others, the Viscounty of Carcassonne and so forth. And these independent rulers were not beholden to the Roman Catholic Church or to the King of France. They did pretty much what they wished. And they welcomed the Cathars. And now maybe a little bit of a definition of terms once again. Katharos in Greek means pure. And owing to their abstemious lifestyle and various other circumstances, the people who then came to be called the Cathars because of their purity of life. They also were called, and you can find descriptions of them in various historical books, the Albigenses. The reason for that being that in that same area, in the Languedoc area of the south of France, there is a city called Albi. And it seems that the first Cathars and the first places of worship that came to be established were in Albi. And so people kept referring to them, all those people from Albi. Just like, I don't know, if we went to, I don't know, Idaho or something like that, established a Gnostic colony there, people might say, well, those are those Hollywoodians. Well, that sort of matter. Now then, that being the case, the land where the Cathars, the pure ones, settled and proliferated, had a strange and mysterious history, much of which is not known but is only intimated. And it would seem that the Pyrenean region, so where the border of Spain and the south of France come together, that the Pyrenean region was a sort of mystical, mysterious place for a long time. You have to keep in mind, and I'm not trying to give you a history lesson, but you need to keep in mind that the Celts, whose big holiday, St. Paddy's Day, will be celebrating very shortly, St. Patrick, that the Celts at one time did not merely occupy the part of the British Islands, but that they were all over Europe. I have encountered people who were still speaking a kind of a strange Celtic jargon in the mountains of the Alps in Austria. And they also have some of the talents that the Celts have elsewhere, because at least these Alpine people of Celtic descent whom we had at that time, they were singularly good clairvoyants and people who could foretell the future and things of that sort. I remember, there come the reminiscences of the old man, and this is not the last one. So, like our parish priest from Hallstatt in the Alps told me that, oh yeah, I says, I know the people here, they know all kinds of stuff that I don't know. Well, tell me, Father Lehner, what sort of thing? Well, for instance, there was a big snowstorm some years ago, and we heard the avalanches come down the mountains, although they fortunately did not come on us. Although you might or might not be I don't think why you should be interested in the fact that I actually lived for a number of years in a little settlement outside the town of Hallstatt, which is called Lahn, which is in the local lingo means an avalanche. And so I was always waiting for the avalanche to come down. Fortunately, it came down after I left the country, and it didn't get my parents and got some others. In the German word for avalanche is Lawine, and the Austrian lingo for it is Lahn. In any event, there was a big storm, and he went into some community building, the priest, to visit the people, and there they were sitting, mostly the older men. He said they were sitting in a circle and looking in front of them, and so he said hello to them, and they greeted him, and he asked them, well, what's going on, gentlemen? He said, well, I think I see that an avalanche, a big avalanche came down in the neighboring valley and buried a number of houses. So we are going to have to get up and go there and rescue the people. And the others, every one of them said, oh yes, I see it too, I see it too, I see it too. And so there, obviously in this case, it became a very helpful and very important deed of rescue. So the Celts were all over the place, and apparently at one time, according to some of the reports, they were also quite strongly established in the Pyrenean region, which is now the south of France. And that the Celts, who, they see ghosts and leprechauns and angels and all kinds of things, and they're very, very, the closer they are to the Celtic line, the more interesting those people are. And they apparently already established a sacred site, a shrine on top of a mountain. And then, as time went on, the people who were there were told, well, you should be careful, because people may come and attack the castle and they may rob you or one thing or the other. They said, no, our castle is secure. And they came to call the mountain and the castle Montségur, the secure mountain. Very soon after that, sort of the news spread that there was a holy mountain there with a holy castle. And it was often, it came to be referred to as the Occidental Mount Tabor being in the Holy Land. And so that is the place to which we refer to today, because the great final martyrdom of the Cathars occurred at that time. As time went on, various powers had become annoyed by the presence of the Cathars in the Languedoc, which is that particular portion of the south of France. It's called Languedoc as the language of oak. The reason being because to this day, the people who speak that language, which is often referred to as Occitan, do not say oui for yes, like the French, but they say oak. And they still do it. Oak is their word for yes. Now, anyway, it came to be known in the Cathar circles particularly that the Occidental Mount Tabor was established there in a castle, and it went up and down. It was apparently originally, so some of the reports say it was a Celtic sacred shrine, but when the Cathars came, they made it into a Cathar castle and a Cathar temple. Now then, obviously, being part of a monolithic Roman Catholic Church, which ruled over all of Europe and the Middle East at that time, the presence of the Cathars did not remain concealed, and more antagonistic voices rose, some of them in exactly the wrong places, such as in Rome, where Pope Innocent III, somewhat misnamed, I always felt, when Pope Innocent III raised, and when there, after the passing of some fairly trivial incident, the Pope preached a crusade against the Cathars. It is the only time in history, as far as we know, where a crusade was preached and conducted against fellow Christians. The others were, of course, always with the conflict with the Muslims. So now various people, many of them of a mainly greedy and nasty nature, came from various parts of Europe and especially various parts of France, and they organized themselves into a crusading army to defeat the Cathars. So the so-called Albigensian Crusades went on for a long time, but the Cathars were present and practicing their religion all the way until the fall of Montségur in 1244. So they were there for a long time, and they were regarded very friendly and reverential manner by the local populace who were still Catholic. They did not convert to the Cathar faith, and they were usually referred to as les bons hommes et les bonnes femmes, the good men and the good women, which would indicate that this was a testimony of their good character on the part of the populace. Finally, there was the first Albigensian Crusade, the second Albigensian Crusade, and there are a number of very reliable, by now many unreliable, a number of very reliable works. The first one that I read was Sir Stephen Runciman's book, Medieval Manichae. Runciman was the leading medievalist scholar in England for many years, and he really knew what he was writing about, very reliable. And probably the other one, primarily depicting the great and terrible event which we are commemorating, was a French lady of Russian origin, Zoe Oldenburg, who wrote many historical novels, all very good. But she also wrote a strictly straight history, which is entitled Massacre at Montségur, or in French, Le Boucher de Montségur, because she wrote in France. These are very reliable sources for what we are talking about. Finally, the Crusaders, as they called themselves, were all over the Languedoc, devastating the country, killing a lot of people, burning down the castles, and finally they came to Montségur, and was a great siege that went on for a long time in the war, and finally by March 16th, 1244, they had conquered the castle. Just a tiny bit, maybe in order to make these circumstances more readily available to us. The Cathar faith was pure Christian Gnosticism. The Cathars referred to them as good Christians and as followers of Jesus Christ. But it's quite obvious from the few teachings that survived in various forms that it was a heavily Gnostic and probably even Manichaean form of Christianity. And like in the Manichaean Church, there were two, this is fairly important, there were two categories of people, the hearers and the initiates. The hearers were sort of the first degree of initiation, and very few demands were made on them. They had no dietary restrictions. They got married, they had children, and just basically abided by the ethics of the Cathars. Then a number of years later, if they so desired, they received an initiation wherein they became known as the perfecti, those who have been perfected. The leading Cathars who did the preaching, who looked after the others, were all of that origin. So when the crusade had pretty well succeeded, there was an assembly of mainly Cathar perfecti that fled to the castle of Montségur, and who then in 1244, the siege went on for about one year. But after, by March 16, 1244, they were conquered, and they were taken prisoner. It may also indicate a little bit of the great fidelity to their faith of the Cathars, if one mentions that on the day when the surrender occurred, 20 or 24 Cathars who had been hearers took the initiation of the perfecti, thereby sealing their fate and going into death without any doubt whatsoever. And then the following day, on the 16th, they were all led off the mountain and into a grassy area, which to this day is called the field of the burnt ones, and there they were burnt at the stake. A large number of people, probably several hundred, marching into the flames, singing hymns. So this was, however, what in French you would call a cause célèbre, because for one thing the Cathars were very much respected and regarded as really good and holy people. So the news of this of this particular event and the other burnings of the heretics, all the cruelty that went on, spread all over France. And believe it or not, it created an atmosphere of hostility, of disappointment, of anger in the French populace, not only in the Languedoc area, but all over the country, who would countenance such an incredible amount of mass cruelty. I mean, this was the Holocaust of the Middle Ages, of the late Middle Ages. And let's say that a lot of the people haven't forgotten that. Neither have they forgotten the Cathar faith. And I wrote into my book, and don't need to go into a great deal of detail. I knew somebody American person who was living in Béziers in the Languedoc at that time, and she remembered that I used to talk about the Cathars. And so she cornered on elderly Frenchmen, I suppose you would call them now, all of them, and asked them, and he looked at me and said, "Cathars, madame?" He says, "We are Cathars. We have never been anything else, and we are still Cathars." So in the consciousness of the people, their relationship to their reverence for the Cathars, who have been, for the most part, so cruelly exterminated, is still there. And we were there now, what year were we there? 1995. We took a little band of pilgrims. There were 7 of us, so we referred to ourselves as the 7 dwarfs. But we were not singing Disney songs while we were there. And when we were there, going up and down the Languedoc area, every highway is called Rue des Cathares, and so on and so forth. And the Occitan language is, so I was told, is still taught in the schools and so forth. So with all of this background and the various information about the Cathars, and being able to see that they were really our close spiritual relatives, we decided to commemorate always in a solemn fashion with the solemn vespers of the martyrs, their great martyrdom. And I don't have the time, but sometimes over coffee it seems it's a much too private a story, but when we had our first service like we had tonight, just prior to that, I had a very curious experience that I never forgot. Our first service, by the way, was co-officiated with me, with my dear sister Rosamond, who has been there and whose family is from the Pyrenean region, and 2 other Gnostic bishops. By now they are all gone to the Pleroma, and I am sort of the old relic that is still here. But let us say it was some interesting things were happening as we were planning to have that service, and then we established it to be an annual event and thereafter. So in conclusion, and I probably really need to conclude, I need to mention that our ancestors, whether they are physical ancestors or spiritual ancestors, or in some cases both, our ancestors are should be an important element in our lives. Why is that so? Because we live in an unobstructed universe, or an unobstructed world, where the spirit world and the world of the living is not really separated completely and forever. And when we remember those who have been here and who are related to us in spirit, or even in our family lineage when that is observed, I come from the kind of family where the family tree was far more important than the trees in the garden. So, in any event, when we just have an allegiance to our connections with the past, then we may discover that the past isn't really all that much past. The past is only as past as we let it to be. Those who are really spiritually related to us, those whom we should place our confidence in even after many years, they are still with us. And that needs to be recognized. And the more we recognize them, the more they will recognize us. Again, in a secular society, these things don't mean much. Or so what, a bunch of ghosts. Oh yes, but remember that the world within which we live, in spite of its difficulties and political and martial interactions and things of that sort, the world that we live in is not composed of nothing. It's not only the physical world that is something, but there is another one in addition to that, a very important one. And when we are aware of that, then we have better company. If you feel at home with the spirits, the angels, the various other non-physical beings, then you have a much larger circle of acquaintances than you would otherwise. And they can be very useful and they can be very helpful. And so that is part of the reason that by giving recognition to those who have gone before, who have followed the same tradition in their own way that we follow now, and I could go on and you would get very unhappy if I did that, but let us say even as far back as the late 19th century and the early 20th century, the presence of the Cathars at the spiritual level was very much present in France. For instance, in France, in Paris, there lived a lady who was English by birth, Lady Caithness, who had married a French duke, Duc de Pommard, and it was in her chapel in Paris that the modern Gnostic church was founded, and who was a great supporter of the revival of Gnosticism. So the Gnostics of another era, the Gnostics of this era, have found each other, and that's a very good thing. And we should keep that in mind and acknowledge our relationship to each other, but also to those who are not in the body, but who are still here, and whose support and kindness and goodness is with us as it always is. There is a saying in the mainstream Catholic Church that with the blood of the martyrs the church was built. Well, undoubtedly, those who give their life, as Jesus Christ said of himself, that he he would, no greater love hath no man but than he who gives up his life for his friends. This is what these people did. They gave them up for other followers of the Gnostic tradition, including ourselves. So let us keep that in mind, and as we can, look to the glorified, martyred spirits on the other side, and acknowledge our relationship to them and ask for their prayers and for their help, for such is available to us and can be extremely useful to us. For there's a longer stream of gnosis, going way back to Alexandria in the 1st, 2nd century or so, and others along the way, and they all belong to us, and we belong to them, because we have a certain tradition, we have a certain orientation. There are certain things that we think and certain things that we do, and if we keep doing that, then their sacrifices, in this case, their death in the flames will not have been in vain, because we are still here pursuing the same goals and following the same tradition and reaching for, and perhaps in due course, not just reaching for, but reaching the one true God whom they addressed, with whom they talked, and who was recognized by them. And so may the mystery of that which hangs twixt heaven and earth descend upon us and remain with us always. Amen.